Good morning, friends, and welcome back. Ken and I are here for another round of Lighting the Candle, a world that works. We're both committed to empowerment in this world for you and for ourselves, but mostly for the people who don't even realize that it's a possibility. So hopefully we'll say something today that'll, maybe ignite something in you, and then you'll keep passing the lit candle on to the people that you meet. So I'm Bill Carell, and that's probably all you need to know about me. If you know more, cool. If you don't, that's not going to hold anybody back. And Ken, you of the two of us, you're the more interesting character. So
I don't know. I think in our own unique ways, we're both pretty interesting.
That's possible. So you know what I was thinking about today? When we're having a conversation. It's all language and linguistics. And the conversations and the words that we use each week, in every conversation that we have with human beings, we're creating a world. We're actually setting the boundaries to it, or unleashing the limitless possibilities. But every conversation has to be first spoken, then listened to and understood, and then examined and questioned. And then as that is happening real time, something gets created, and if there's a feeling that comes along with that, something in the body, then something new may possibly be have created. So for example, if you make someone smile, they not only, you can't smile without feeling something in your chest, and in your back, and sometimes you'll get goosebumps while you're smiling. That is a change, and it's a felt shift from where you were the moment before you smiled. So what is a felt shift? Well, it's just energy that shows up in your body somewhere where there's actually movement. There's some sort of a change that occurs. And this is a term, I think, that's used most of all in psychology, where they're talking about people who seem to have a stuckness. And so, the whole idea of focusing and asking yourself questions and, in a state that's not quite meditating, but it's a quiet state where you are actually asking your body questions that your mind will want to answer for your body. But when your body answers it, it's because there's a change. Mm-hmm. So I'm asking people to take a look in your life and notice when there's some sort of in the body change. So I know you'll have some things to say about that. And we learn by using at least 3 senses at the same time. And we know we've learned something when there's actually a response in the body.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's a dynamic associated with, for instance, when you first rode a bicycle. And it was all about doing all these things at the same time, doing them right. Mm-hmm. The tension was completely on, trying not to fall down, et cetera, et cetera. However, once you have balance in your body, the rest of your life, you know what that is, and you can return to that state. Mm-hmm. So I've covered a lot here, but the whole idea is, what do you think about having a chat about language, linguistics, and creating worlds? The lighting of the candle is first done by either speaking or reading or writing or something of that nature, some sort of language communication, I say, just as a jumping off point.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how, the information has to be introduced to us in some form, so, and the language really gives you a way to clarify and create, a message, and it is interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot actually lately, especially just, when there's so much of the world is kind of in a state of alarm and crisis. It can be challenging to be intentional about the words that you're putting out there, and it becomes, sometimes it can, if we're not thinking about it, we're just either, echoing back or repeating things or just saying things without really, I'm doing it right now, but I pause for a moment to think not about what I want to say, but the impact, the potential impact those words would have, you know, and personally, my core values are grace, balance, and respect when speaking. So, you know, so doing it in a way that's not going to be judgmental or attacking, or, you know, it may not be received well, but not intentionally confrontational just to be that. So, you know, so it's interesting. I think that behind the linguistics and the words that you use and all the fun things you can talk about with that, you know, simple things like replacing the word but with and in a sentence and see what happens. I want to be in great shape, but I don't have time. I want to be in great shape and I don't have time. It opens you up to solutions, right? So you have that part of it. But I think the underlying thing is, who are you when you're speaking, you know, and are you aware of who you're choosing to be when you're speaking, as like a starting point to having more meaningful, you know, like impact from the language, result-oriented language, I guess you would say.
Yeah, so that's really very interesting. And there was somebody long ago, I don't remember who it was, who explained to me that the word "but" is the most powerful argument in the world. It immediately dismisses anything that you just said before it.
Yep.
So if you want to honor somebody and you're repeating what they're saying, don't use the word "but" after it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, anything but, you know.
Yeah. And it's interesting how we teach, it's one of the first things we teach to team members.
Yep.
You know, we talk about certain words like that, and we're not telling them not to use it. We're just telling them to notice when they use it.
Right.
And then giving them an alternative, you know, and it's kind of like, you know, we would see this with kids. Telling a kid to calm down or to not do something, it's not actionable. You know, you're basically creating a void, and you're not giving them information on how to fill it. So, you know, so that's why if we have kids get frustrated, we would teach them to count out. They'd make a fist and they'd, you know, do like a 5 count and put it on their stomach and do a diaphragmatic breath. Mm-hmm. So same thing, if someone just says to you, "but" is a disqualifying word, what do you do with that? There's nothing that you can test and experiment that replaces it. And I wonder if that doesn't
written down anywhere either. You know,
yeah.
I don't. There's probably not a book that's called how "but" invalidates your entire life. You know.
Yeah.
We could write that.
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting, and we, you know, we started playing with different things like that, and even things like word fasts. You know, I think I've talked about it. I removed the word "I" from my language. It ended up being a year of intentionally working to speak in a way where I did not show up. And it was a practice in being more we oriented and more collaborative and group oriented, and also a little bit of starting to notice how much the personal ego can take over and skew things, and, you know, relationships and that kind of stuff. And it was a year just because I was a slow learner, and then it was integrated back. And now it's interesting because what it led to is more just a relationship with thinking of I, we as a spectrum. And sometimes your center of gravity is more towards, you know, expressing things through I, and other times it's shifted more towards a we and less I. Never right or wrong. Noticing it is the key. And it started by thinking intentionally about a certain word and either adding it, removing it, or replacing it. You know, another good one is try. Very vigilant about the word try showing up in language and what that influences. And another couple quick examples, yes or no, not sure. Like, or, you know, so it's just be definitive. You know, sure is a lot of times can be kind of, I'm agreeing, but I don't really want to.
Like, so, right? Or
yeah.
right, you know?
Yeah.
I believe that's called fogging.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's interesting, but if you don't, you know, it's first there's bringing attention, but then there's also what's the alternative? that you can test and experiment with to see what's true for you,
Mm-hmm.
how it works for you.
I kind of like that. When you were doing the eye experiment, were there other people that were going through this with you and kind of imposing the same rigor on themselves at the same time?
No, no one knew. Yeah,
Oh,
no
okay.
one knew. Yeah, I usually when I'm doing these experiments, I don't say anything to anyone. I just test them. So, and then afterwards,
You trust your own readout on it, huh? Good for you.
it was more. It's more about I'm doing it for very personal reasons, and I don't want to unnecessarily influence the outcome by bringing people's awareness to it, because now once they know the way, what I'm most interested in is creating graceful responses,
Yeah.
and and adding value to the relationships of the people around me. So if I tell them I'm doing it, now they're either going to look for it and help me or call me on it, or or whatever. It's going to skew the experiment for me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, you stand among some pretty wild crackpots. Bucky Fuller, you're aware that he went 2 full years without speaking a word.
Yes. Yeah.
His whole concept was it was on the end of a really terrible failure. I guess he got out of college and was recognized as an engineering genius, and all his friends gave them all their money and everything. So he invested in all these prefab homes, and oh man, this was going to be the new way for everybody to get what they wanted at a fair price. Everything was built into it. It was extremely energy efficient. It was, this, that, and the other thing. It failed. They lost all the money. And he was so broken down about it. He said, I'm tired of people believing me. I'm tired of people listening to what I say and thinking I'm infallible. I'm not going to speak again until I feel like I really have something to say, something new, something different. Now, that may not be entirely accurate in terms of every detail. However, that's the gist of what he did for
Right.
Now, it put a lot more weight on his wife, who became his interpreter, who would actually do the speaking in situations where he needed to respond to people.
Yeah.
I think that's remarkable, because what he did after that is he circumnavigated the globe speaking all over the world at different colleges, universities, and consortiums and what have you. Over 3,000 events, for the rest of his life. He was still in demand in his 80s. And he had fun, because he would play a game called How Long Can I Talk and You All Will Still Listen and Sit in Your Seats. He didn't tell them. But I think he ended up at one point for like either 36 hours or 48 hours straight, and he still had most of the audience there after all that time.
So that's awesome.
Well, I mean, I can't imagine keeping anybody's interest these days for more than 15 or 20 minutes. That's why we're doing these a half hour at a time. So in the meantime, while you were speaking, what I was thinking is that, so and is another good word. And in a lot of conversation, that is also, become a crutch. Like it has to be and. Could it be another word like so, or therefore, or some other, connector? Like, for instance, if you're having an argument with your 9-year-old daughter and you say, I know you think it's appropriate for you to go over to your friend's house and smoke cigarettes, instead of using the word but, or using the word and, so comes out instead of that, and then what can come after so? So that means you also are probably old enough to support yourself and get a job, and I think all those sorts of things as well. So how about you don't get any clothing allowance for the next 3 months? You get to wear the same old stuff you've been wearing, or something of that nature. But if we use the word but, whenever we're thrown to use the word but, first of all, we have to hear it coming.
Right. Yep.
So that's where and has really always been a very wonderful thing, because there's nothing in and that he says what you said, and I'm neither agreeing nor disagreeing with it, and there's this to say about that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a fun experiment, and there's probably for most people not a right or wrong.
Yeah,
And we would talk about that. Start with and as just so you have unless you have a better idea,
sure.
and then test other things and see what works for you. It's funny that example you used is an interesting one, especially in dealing with the consequences of people's choices, right? Like that. Um, One of the things that I practiced was if my response was going to be an I was the first word, I try to swap it out with a discovery word. So, like, for example, why do you feel that it's okay for you to go smoke at your friends? Instead of like more, I'm coming from a place of knowledge and wisdom, which I may be, but now I'm pushing. I'm gonna engage their resistance because they're already holding a position. So instead, it's the word, and the word triggers me. If I find myself wanting to say, you know what, I used to be your age, or I think, or I know, or I've learned,
Yeah.
stop myself. And that may come later. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just become like a signal for me to ask a question to better kind of get them to define their position before I just start throwing my thoughts at the wall and seeing what sticks, So
Well,
this is like a big rabbit hole you could really go down.
100%. And the really interesting, in my experience, the word why has the same invaluable necessity in our language that but has always had.
Mm,
Simply because if you ask somebody a question
mhm.
and it starts with the word why, what do you get 100% of the time? An answer.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
As opposed to when you say, why would you go to your friend's home and smoke cigarettes when you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Mhm.
then now they have to justify not only the action that they took,
Mhm.
but that they were a sentient being while they were taking the action.
Yeah.
That there was a reason for it,
Yep.
So the whole idea of reasonableness and unreasonableness, if you really like somebody, then you find other words to use in place of why, because you have that ability to create the world coming out of their mouth. It's
Mhm.
either going to be a box this size, or it's going to be something potentially wide open that you can take a look at.
Yeah.
Do
And as you're saying that, it's interesting because tone comes into play
Yes.
huge in this. So I'll give you a how example.
Yeah.
When I over the years, it'd have so many teenagers, parents would be like, they just did this really, really dumb thing. And because, as one of their teachers they respected, I'd have the conversation with them, and not really, more just so that for the parents, it was usually having someone outside of the familial unit
Yeah.
that they had to be accountable to, so they do whatever dumb thing. And the question I'd ask is, how's that working out for you?
Yeah.
And like half the time they would cry, like, not good,
Yeah.
So, but it was interesting because I had to be very careful to not put the tone where it's, well, how's that working out for you? Like kind of accusationally or judgmentally. It was always from a place of curiosity,
Yeah.
So a parent saying, why in the world would you do that? That's not open. That's not open, as opposed to, well, why do you think that would be okay? I'm genuinely curious to hear, so it's funny how even the tone now has, like a lot to do with how it's received beyond just the words that we're saying.
Absolutely. We've had this conversation before, but when we talk about three legs of language, the first one is the structural one, which is object to object, where I push you, you push me. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
or the relationship of me, my backside on this chair. This chair has a contract with me that it's going to hold me right here where I am. That's my contract with the chair, because that's what
Mm-hmm.
chairs do, right? So then there's the next one, which is, it's got a lot of different things, but it's nonverbal immediate language, where there's gestures, and you can do this with animals, and it's being to being. It can be another person. A smile is going to get you a smile back in most cases, but it will almost always get you some sort of a reaction. No words. Right. And then the last thing is the representational language. And what's really fun about this is that representational language has to do with the words that we use in any descriptive sense are an approximation of what something is,
Yeah.
But it's a starting point for two people in a conversation to be able to hold something up and then possibly share a view of it and distinguish what they see that's the same and different. So all three of those things, the smile, the tap on the shoulder, and then ultimately, what the hell were you thinking? Whatever
Right.
the language is, or what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Or
No, it changes it completely.
What were you thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting about the representational nature of language. I can remember it's going back 20 years when I first started working privately with John, my mentor and martial arts instructor. One of the first things he did is he said, all right, what we need to do is make sure we're speaking the same language, and that the things that I had been learning through other teachers, that the way he used that language, I was hearing it the way he used it, and the way I was using it, he was hearing it. So we had to and it was interesting. There were some discrepancies there. So, so there might've been, just a simple word like power, that had a different meaning when he was using it than the way it had been explained to me by other teachers. Yes. So, so he took the time right at the beginning, and he's like, yeah, we're using these words, but that doesn't mean we're understanding them the same way. So let's do a little dance here and go back and forth until we know that when one of us is saying something, the other knows what that person actually means by it. Yeah. So, yeah. And how often, is there confusion for exactly that reason?
Well, what you're describing, I'm playing with the notion in terms of formal organizations, what I've always called as a organic knowledge. And I call it off-book intelligence. So for instance, every single formal manufacturing facility has all of these manuals and everything, and the ISO 9000 and 9001 and 9026, 27, whatever it is, for all these different reasons. And what's really fun is that they get looked at while they're being created, and then the steps formally go into place. So for instance, my wife and I were talking a while back, just over the weekend, and we were discussing how when a whole company shifts and picks up and goes to China, and they leave behind all of these people with 15, 18, 30 years of experience working in that company, the corporate mindset, the organic and off-book intelligence. This is the thing where you go and you get a setup sheet, and it says you turn this machine on to this temperature. You make sure that you have at least this amount of pressure, so that when you clamp the two halves of a mold together, this happens. And how you test it is you take a little bit of water and you splash the water on it. If the water beads up and rolls around, no, that's not in the manual. Okay. And the other thing that's not in the manual is if you make one piece and it's bad at the prescribed settings, then what do? Well, this is where, Joe, who's been here for 18 years, he says, what they fail to take into account is that temperature gauge is incorrect. It's off by 8 degrees. Okay. I mean, if you're working in an environment where somebody has to figure out what's missing in order for the rules to be applied and to actually work, that's what I'm talking about, is the off-book experiential knowledge that human beings have to have that even putting notes into a computer, if the computer were sentient and able to, had AI and could read all of the notes, it still couldn't relate to that mold. It couldn't relate to the rubber or the plastic or whatever it is that's going into the mold. This is where human beings and people do make a huge difference. They're not a small part of the equation at all.
It's one of the biggest barriers to scale. Exactly that. You got that institutional or organizational knowledge, that kind of hive mind. And if that's not, if you haven't created a structure that allows for like a communication superhighway, so that gets translated beyond, what the system just lays a framework, but you're right. It's the humans. I'm like convinced that you can scale almost infinitely if you have the right humans, in place. They'll overcome any issues with the model or the systems if they're aligned and they've been trained to be skillful and independent thinkers and all that kind of stuff.
And you've got all that, and they have to be the ones engaged. The unconscious competence is what really kills organizations. You can ask people what they know, and they'll answer your question with what they know. And it's not contextual. It has no, outcome, either good or bad. It's a prediction, or these are the steps in the thing. However, if those steps are not working, what will then come out is something they weren't even aware that they knew. They'd forgotten that they knew it. But why did it come out? Because we're having the conversation and it's applicable and it's something that I can bring to the party, to make this a better situation.
Yep.
And that is 95% of consulting. Good consulting is all about that.
And it's just such an interesting thing how you've got it's much harder. People are a variable that's much more difficult and challenging to account for. So I think sometimes the default is to focus on the manual, and then try to force the people to just implement the manual, as opposed to figuring out how to make it, we would talk about it all the time. How do we make it easier for people to just make the right choice, for the situation, or at least look for a better choice, or, be open to that. But that gets messy. It's much more difficult and it's funny. I mean, it's just circling back. It's the same thing with language, how each person expresses language, how skillfully they do it, is going to be a fluid thing, and it's going to be ever changing over time. Yeah. So it's probably why a book has never really been written about it, because it would only work for a small percentage of people. It might be a stepping off point, but we're all too unique.
It is one of those things that's very powerful and not very useful.
Yeah.
Again, the whole crux of language is it's 175% contextual. Mm-hmm. We can say the same thing, in 5 different groups of human beings to start off a conversation. And I love this, when people say, well, I didn't go to that networking meeting because I already know what everybody's going to say. Well, the fun part of it is good luck with that. You have no idea that somebody can say one thing, that completely shifts what the tone, the tenor, what's interesting for people to share. And I have to tell you, that's really what life is all about. Not the by rote, what did you see on TV last night, but what did you not see on TV last night that you've heard secondhand and it concerns you? And what are your concerns? And how have you felt this way? And what would it be like, in this world that we're creating where we're lighting the candle and everything works? Wow. How could we return to that state over and over and over from that didn't work. I got a fly in here. He seems to be wanting some attention from me. I'm going to give him some bad attention if he doesn't keep it up. So Ken, we're getting close to the top of the half hour. anything you'd like to say is by way of a segue into the next 30-minute session?
No, nothing comes to mind. This has been just kind of a fun, free-flowing conversation, just playing with language. Yeah.
Well, awesome. So thank you all for tuning in. And if you've listened this far, we're going to be doing another half hour in just a moment. So stand by for news. Be back shortly.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.